and an environment where people are functioning in the comfort zone. What do you think will happen to a new idea like becoming a learning organization? Last year we discussed how people learned, primarily experientially. Now let's take a look at the domains of knowledge. First, there are some things you know that you know. You know how to get up in the morning and get ready for work. You know how to do your work functions. And you know how to take care of your family. Second, there are some things you also know you don't know. You may use a word processing software every day, and you know how to use certain functions. But you know there are many capabilities which exist in the software, and you know you don't know how to use them. And if you're like me, you probably could care less. But I still know I don't know them. The third domain, there are some things we don't know we know. We have each encountered someone in our lives that was a master at something, whether he or she was a leader, a sports figure, an artist, a concert musician. They execute their roles masterfully. But if you ask them what they do or how they do it, they may tell you, actually, they don't know. And yet they do it. Fourth, there are things we don't know. Think of a male infant, for example. He doesn't know. What exists is what he sees. He doesn't know there are things he doesn't know. Same is true for us as adults. For example, I recently visited the hill tribes in northern Thailand. I didn't know several of them even existed until my guide made me aware of them, and we hiked into the hills to explore and learn about them. I didn't know they were there. Can you think of some examples for yourself? How about some business examples? Do you know or don't know? Or don't you know that you don't know there are emerging markets out there? New competitors for you? There was a survey conducted of CEOs, and one of the questions was, what keeps you up at night? One said, I don't worry about sales, finances, production, etc. I trust my people have those things handled. I worry about what my people don't know they don't know. The point is, our basis for decision-making is knowing. But the basis for change is learning or not knowing. If you want to become a learning organization, you must be aware of how your organization perceives data, how you create your organizational truths, and how you react with others' realities. Can you stay open to the process of learning and the discomfort of confronting the question, what you don't know you don't know? Can you support and reward publicly those who do? Can you let you go of your preferred reality long enough not to filter out additional data which might challenge your preferred view, your preferred corporate view? Influencing perception are our core values. I have discussed the importance of values in an organization several times in these broadcasts. And each year I become more convinced of the power of each person understanding and being able to articulate their personal values and the choices they make to join organizations who have clearly articulated their shared values. Values define the parameters of behavior which are supported in the organization. Understanding those parameters frees the individual in the organization to become fully engaged without concern or fear of retribution. With the fear removed, people will take the initiative to grow. Where there is growth, there is learning. We'll take a break to answer any questions you might have, and when we return, we'll talk about the role of attitude and some of the research which has been conducted which will demonstrate the power of our organizational cultures in either nurturing or rejecting learning.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffmann. Let's begin the first question and answer session. We will try to answer as many questions as possible. Therefore, we ask that only one question be asked per phone call and that these questions be as brief as possible. You may call the studio directly at the phone numbers or fax which now appear on your screen. We remind you to make your phone calls at a distance from the monitor to avoid feedback. The first question is coming to us from Morelia, Michoacán, from the National Autonomous University in Mexico. This is the College of Veterinary Medicine.
Morelia?
Okay, Morelia, adelante. Good morning. I am calling from the Association of Veterinary Doctors in Michoacán. We have a few questions regarding the following. The first question is, what is the process through which you eliminate fear after a failure? How can you lead a group of workers who have been working for many years in a hazardous area, and how can you lead them into a very highly productive mode? How can you employ that perception of reality of the workers? And in a conflictive workplace, what is the behavior that you can actually carry out in order to have a positive effect?
Okay. I believe the first part of the question was removing fear from the organization. As you think of how people are being rewarded or how people are not being rewarded in an organization, generally determines how they're going to behave. So, for example, if an employee, and I'm not sure about the hazardous part here, but if an employee is concerned about a particular issue and wants to provide information which, in fact, could change the direction of your business based on that decision, and the atmosphere is not one in which the person is willing to take that risk, the information will never get to you. And so it's up to the leaders to be very clear in their expectations. It is up to the leaders to be very clear in their behaviors, the behaviors that they support people taking risks, and that people get recognized for that, so that in fact others would be willing to join. So the removal of fear is really creating understanding and support. And I'm not sure about if I understood the other parts of the questions. What I thought I heard was, if they're working in a very hazardous area, is it fear from the organization or is it fear from the type of work? If it's fear from the organization, that needs to be removed. If it's hazardous work, clearly safety is important, whatever that is. And even more important in those situations, for the people to be able to express themselves, give the right information, and create a level of understanding so that the right decisions can be made. And I think the third part had to do with how the organization perceives. I think until each of the people in the organization have some idea of how they're perceiving things, and then as information is received in the organization and how the organization responds, will start giving you clues into the perceptual process of the organization. And once we start understanding that, then we know what's most important to the organization. If what you hear from them isn't what you believe should be important, clearly then the leaders have another challenge to go back and address that. So hopefully that helps the answer. I wasn't sure about all the details of the question.
Aquí es la cosa.
Bien, y ahora desde Morelia, Michoacán, nos vamos a Perú.
And now we're going to Peru, Lima, Peru, where we are getting the following question from the National University of Engineering, Lima. Adelante.
Universidad Nacional de Ingeniería. Tenemos un par de
We have a couple of questions
que quisiéramos formular juntas.
for you. We're going
¿Cómo se puede
to
pasar
link these two questions. How can we go from one organization
de normas rígidas
who has very rigid standards and norms that creates a lot of insecurity because it's afraid of failure to another type of organization where you can develop an environment that is more conducive to learning
negativas?
from negative experiences? Another question. In an intelligent organization,
La investigación y el
research and elaboration of diagnostics is very important in order to prepare for organizational change. What do you think? Or do you think we can just ignore this process?
In organizations that have a lot of standards and rules and regulations, so that in fact the right kinds of things occur, the right kinds of products are done, or if you're doing a lot of research, clearly you need to use the scientific methods, and I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about, though, is the environment that the workers are working in while executing those standards or while executing those rules and policies, so that in fact your research is sound. So, again, it's looking at how the leadership is interfacing with the information that is received. If there is some research going around on a very technical area, and again, someone in the organization has made some discovery about how this will affect the whole project, and because they know that there's a deadline to meet and the boss will be very upset, and they may not bring the information forward, which doesn't benefit the organization. So how do you create the conversations, the very tough conversations, which allow people to express those, and in fact, they're recognized for bringing them up to make the product better? So it has to do with the whole leadership issue. I think the other thing around the diagnostics, etc., clearly we have, as you embark in your detailed research, that diagnostics and the types of things that come out of all of that are critically important for the success of whatever the project is you're working on. And again, from a scientific perspective, those have to be done, and I encourage you to continue to do those. They do matter a great deal. How those are communicated also matters a great deal. And that's where, if you can remove any of the fear from the organization, then people will say, I made a mistake. And by the way, I made a mistake, and here's what I learned from it. And how can the rest of the organization then learn from having made that mistake? And if that kind of behavior is recognized by the leadership, then it reinforces that continued type of behavior.
Continuamos nuestro viaje vía satélite. Ahora
Now
nos
we
vamos a
are
Argentina.
on
La
our
siguiente
satellite journey,
participación viene de Río
and we are
Tercero,
going
Instituto Nobel. Lo
to
escuchamos.
Rio Tercero, Argentina.
Sí, del Instituto Nobel de Río Tercero, Córdoba, Argentina.
Cordoba, Argentina. In Argentina, we have companies who have a very position in the market but do not have an organizational culture that promotes change and innovation. And so it's just has a heavy culture, stagnating culture that may clash with today's globalization phenomenon. So what would be the most effective way for small to medium enterprises to provoke in them these changes in organizational culture, and how to implement these?
Okay, I was just viewing some research yesterday, actually, that showed very clearly those organizations that can accept change and those organizations that will reject change. And we'll review some of that research in the next part of my talk. But as I hear your question. I think that you need to understand how what rewards your organization provides the people. And when I talk about rewards, I don't mean rewards in terms of money, etc. It's what's recognized as being important by the leadership. And understanding how those rewards then affect the behavior within the organization of what you've defined to be most important. Most important from what is the vision of what you're trying to do with your business, as well as what are the values that you have defined as being the core guides for your organization. If those two things are very clear, the behaviors that surround that are how you will see whether or not the people believe you, number one, or whether or not they're supporting that. And it will also tell you whether or not you're supporting it, because they'll behave in the way that the leaders want them to behave. And so I would suggest, as you want to challenge the organization, the first thing we need to do is understand the dynamics that are driving it. Then, once you understand that, you can start looking at what hooks you can put into that organization to drive a different type of behavior. And so it's really understanding current state and what the elements are in the organization that you can change to get to the future state. That's what I would say. It's nothing magic, but it's a lot of very difficult work in understanding how that works, how the organization perceives, how the organization is aware of things, makes decisions, and then how it learns. Because without that, learning won't take place.
From Argentina, we are now going to Cerro Azul, Veracruz, Mexico. This one is coming from the Technological Institute of Cerro Azul, Mexico.
Cerro Azul, ¿está en la línea? Cerro Azul.
We've lost
hemos
them.
perdido contacto con Cerro Azul, Veracruz para la siguiente pregunta. Entonces nos trasladamos ahora a Panamá.
Now we're going to Panama.
Esta participación. Adelante, Panamá.
Sí, muy buenos días.
Good morning.
Hablamos desde el Centro Regional de
We're calling in from the university in Azuero, Technological University of Panama. The question is, how can you impart instruction to a manager who says he knows what he should know without knowing what he should know in order for him to know what he should know and do it? Thank you.
Okay. That's not necessarily an easy one to answer, and I appreciate the question. The context in which we were talking is how the organization can learn. And as you think of the managers in the organization, how do you help them become aware of other things that are occurring in the world? So that if I say I know what I know, and that's all I need to know, I'll behave in that way. However, what are the human performance mechanisms that you have in place that will support them changing the behavior in a way that will expand their knowledge base? So what kind of human performance mechanisms are you using to drive the change? That's one thing. I think the other thing is how does the organization understand the data that it's receiving? Is it filtering out the fact that maybe I ought to be looking in another part of the world for information on this aspect of my market? Or that I ought to be searching somewhere else with reference to the development of this particular product? And is that type of behavior encouraged in the organization? Because it's through that kind of encouragement and that kind of recognition of that behavior that will support that manager expanding their horizons, and then know that the broader perspective is being recognized as important as opposed to the narrow perspective, and then change the behavior.
Desde Panamá nos vamos ahora
From Panama, we're going to Brazil.
por el Servicio Brasileño de Apoyo a la Micro y Pequeña
This
Empresa
is
en
the
Minas Gerais.
small and
Escuchamos.
medium-sized enterprises. This is
Minas Gerais,
Minas Gerais, Brazil.
En general, buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
En
in general, within organizations, within learning organizations, learning is on the part of the leaders of these organizations. How can you develop a process whereby the people can really learn to learn by having these organizations, turning these organizations really into real learning organizations?
Okay, I think the first point, the leaders have to learn. Clearly, the leaders have to learn, but one of the things that is coming out of the research around becoming a learning organization is that fundamental to it is a commitment for each individual in the organization to be encouraged to grow personally. And so fundamental, or almost core, in becoming a learning organization is at the individual level. What is the commitment to personal growth over time? And so with that as a premise, then I think the organization starts looking at ways of recognizing and supporting the individual in their endeavor to learn. And as that occurs, the organization starts changing its perceptual ability and awareness around what's available, so it gathers information. The tension always is that we learn through failure, and we prefer not to fail in business. So it's not putting it at such a high risk that the business fails when you make that mistake. But in fact, what are the mechanisms for people to have those experiences every day in business so that they do take advantage of them? And then are the leaders creating the environment where that information is shared? Because they won't become a learning organization if I'm the only one who learns and no one around me does. So how do we create the mechanisms to gather the information and then share it? So what kinds of conversations are you having in small groups? What kinds of conversations are you having as the leadership organization with all the employees? Or what kind of conversations are the employees having among themselves around either process improvements, the things they've learned around that, around the research that's being conducted, etc. So we've learned from having done the experience, and we've retained the information, and we've shared it.
En la frontera México-Estados Unidos,
No, we're going to the border, Mexico,
ciudad de Tijuana. Desde allí formulan la
San
siguiente
Diego,
pregunta del
between
Instituto Politécnico
at the
Nacional.
border, right, we have Tijuana. Good morning. What do you think of the Socrates phrase saying, all I know is that I don't know anything?
All I know is that I don't know anything. I think the phrase in and of itself says they know something. So I'm not sure how to respond to that question. 'Cause I'm not sure the context of the question, so that's why I'm not sure how to respond.
Continuamos ahora con la pregunta o participación que viene de los Mochis, Sinaloa,
Question
México.
coming from
La
Sinaloa,
formulan del Colegio de Bachilleres
From
Estado de Sinaloa. La escuchamos.
Sinaloa, Mexico.
Gracias, Armando.
Thank you, Armando.
La pregunta es,
The question is, what features, what characteristics must a training program have in order to have a learning organization? In other words, what are the courses and in what order would you suggest them?
That can be a very long discussion, actually. But as I think of some of the key elements or threads that have to go through each of the courses, no matter what the courses are, whether they be technical courses or whether they be management courses in terms or behavioral courses, coaching courses, etc., or the human performance development courses. We ought to look at each of those courses to make sure that as you have the conversation and you present the information, that it's presented in alignment with where you want to take the organization. So first of all, it ought to have some reflection of the vision of the organization. There also ought to be some strategic reason why this material is being offered. So does this material support the strategies of the organization? So let's take an example of coaching, for example. So if we're doing coaching, what are we coaching what is the process doing to help us to achieve the objective for the business? And as we look at the human characteristics around that, are they supporting the values that we said that were important to us in the organization? So there's this constant linking and alignment between the vision, the strategies, the values of the organization. So now if people are important in the organization and telling the truth is an important value in the organization, when you've made a mistake, you can tell the truth about it without being afraid. And through that process, you'll become more of a learning organization, or the people will learn, and the organization by default can become more of a learning organization. But as opposed to prescribing courses, I would really look at what is the material or the skill sets or the knowledge the business needs to be effective, and are all of those things supportive and aligned with what we say is important in the business, our vision, our strategies, and the fundamental values that we stand for.
Nos trasladamos ahora al estado de
Now
México,
we're going to Mexico State.
Coacalco. La
Coacalco.
participación viene de la Universidad Nacional
This
Autónoma
is
de
coming
México,
from the Autonomous
Universidad
National University of
Hispanoamericana.
Mexico, Hispano-American organization, Hispanic American.
recomendaría para mantener
What would you recommend for us to keep up with a positive attitude from values all the way to quality of decisions in companies who are in crisis? And how can you tell the personnel who knows that they don't know? Thank you, Dr. Hoffmann. From our university here, we want to thank you for your lecture.
Thanks. As you think of organizations that are in crisis, communication is critically important. And having the right information is almost more critical to an organization in crisis. And so as you think about the kinds of behaviors that some leaders and managers and many of the people have when you're in crisis, we sort of revert back to those behaviors which can be most comfortable and sometimes most aggressive. But as you look at the organization in the crisis mode, for leaders to take time to listen carefully is critically important. And through the listening, have the conversations where the right information gets exchanged. So if there's aberrant behavior, people are running around screaming and hollering and this sort of thing, clearly the organization will not get the data it needs to make any kinds of decisions, much less effective decisions. Okay? And so I would say that to be very conscious when you're in crisis of actually creating the environment where people can tell the truth and speak their point of view more effectively than ever. It's not easy.
Toma parte ahora en esta televideoconferencia.
Now we have Mexico City participating, and this is coming from the Telecommunications Polytechnical Institute. Buenos días. My name is Gastón González, and I am calling from the border, from the Continuous Education Center of the Polytechnical Institute. First of all, I would like to congratulate Dr. Hoffmann for this wonderful lecture, very enlightening, and we also have a couple of questions for him. First of all is, what is the solution so that the image that we project is really in touch with reality? And then the other question is, how can we avoid or prevent distortion from happening, in the sense that the distortion that the employee has as far as regards the camaraderie and the sometimes the higher level management is misinterpreted by the lower level, and then this may be misleading or misinterpreted and by the lower level. So how can we prevent that from happening?
Okay, to the first point of how do we align our images of reality, it's sort of like that accident. You have to have a conversation to find out what the group's view is of how they define reality. And then start taking a look at whether or not that definition of reality fits in to where you're trying to take the business. So it comes down to having a lot of conversation again, the discovery process. And then understanding what we might be filtering out. Are we taking a position that says, I'm filtering out some information here that was available to others, and am I open to the possibility that that might be true? So it's holding the possibility open. I think to the second piece is that it's a very common issue in any kind of organization, because as a lower level employee, my point of view of the world might be that these leaders have everything, that they're out to get me, etc. And I'll start viewing things and making decisions that way. And the leaders are trying to create the environment where, in fact, they encourage the people to contribute most effectively. And so again, it comes down to having the conversation, sometimes one-on-one, but gaining the understanding and the trust, gaining the respect, and gaining the credibility that the leader needs to have from the people who are following. And as simple as it sounds, it's also difficult. Having the conversation and being able to address it head-on, so you encourage them to tell the truth, whatever their truth is, and then you can discuss it to come to a mutual understanding.
And
now we're going to Veracruz, and we have something coming from the Technological Institute. Good morning. We're calling from Veracruz, Misantla, Veracruz. We have a question. In a very recently formed company with young people and not very experienced people, but with a great need to leave an imprint in society, how can you really create leaders with a vision and with a vision of reality that will lead them to excellence?
Creating leaders, I think that's how I heard the question. I'm not sure that's something that we do. I think that leaders emerge based on their ability to describe a future or a vision which others want to follow and others want to achieve. And so a leader may not have all the aspects, but one of the things that a leader has to do is clearly articulate the vision. And it's through that articulation of the vision, which actually is their idea, but sort of a coalescing or a summation of the vision of all of the people. And engaging them and sharing that is one of the key characteristics of a leader. Having said that, if the vision is understood and there's a passion around it by the leadership and the organization, the leaders will emerge and you'll create the leaders. What will also occur is that you'll engage the rest of the organization, and this is a young group of people, engage the organization where they're sharing a lot of information